Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be replacing the paddle and the scraper bar on a Toro 721R snowblower. The scraper bar is a pretty easy process to replace. The paddle system can get kind of complicated, so let's jump right into the video. So the paddle system is actually the system you're going to see right here. It's the rubber part of the snowblower that actually scrapes up the snow and then throws it out of the discharge chute. Typically you need to replace your paddle system about every 2 to 5 years depending on use. Here's a brand new rubber paddle. As you can see in the very top of the picture, there's a hole. That hole is a wear indicator. So once that rubber goes down to that hole, wears out to that hole, it's time to replace your paddle system. And the paddle system needs to be replaced about every 2 to 5 years depending on how often you use it. If you're using the paddle system a lot for like a commercial operation, or you live where there's a lot of snow, then you need to replace it probably sooner than the 2 years. If you only use it once or twice a year, the 5 years might be okay. Here's a used paddle. You can see it's worn all the way down to that wear indicator. That's when you need to actually replace the paddle. So let's pull the snowblower up and take a look at it. There is 2 bolts at the top. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 2 bolts on each side that need to be removed to get each paddle out. There's 2 paddles in the system. It's going to require a 11mm wrench to get the bolts out. The bolts on the top and the left are actually pretty easy to do. The bolts on the right are a little bit more complicated. The wear indicator is actually on the left side where my finger is right there. You can see it's worn all the way down to that hole. There's no hole there anymore, so this paddle system does need to be replaced. And to get started here, we're going to get the 11mm wrench out and stuff, and we're going to go ahead and remove the first 2 bolts. The 2 bolts in the front are very easy to remove. It's not complicated at all. Now that I got the 2 front bolts out, now I'm going to move to the left side and get the 2 side bolts on the left. The left side is actually pretty easy to remove as well. The 2 front ones are easy. The 2 on the left side are easy. Once we move over to the right side of the snowblower where the belt is, there's less room to work with, which makes it a lot more complicated to get those 2 bolts out, especially the one on the right, the bottom one of that paddle. So the left side's pretty easy to remove. I'm not really struggling too much to get those bolts out. Once we go to the right side, it's going to be a little bit more complicated because you don't have a whole lot of room to work with. So I did the best I can removing them. Putting the bolts back in is going to be where the problem is when you are on the right side where that belt system is. So now that I'm moving the camera, you can see on the right side that plastic goes closer to the actual paddle system. That's where your belt is, and there's not a whole lot of room, as you can see, to work with. Removing it is pretty easy. It's putting the bolts back in that it's going to be a complicated process. I got the first rubber paddle out. We're going to start working on getting the 2 metal inserts out of the old rubber paddle, and we're going to put it into the new system right there. If you look real closely right there, you can see the 2 metal inserts. And if you look at the wear indicator I'm pointing to right there, it's worn down completely to that wear indicator, that little hole. That's when you need to replace your paddle system. Now that we have the old inserts installed into the new paddle, we're going to start installing all the bolts. Now that I got the 2 front bolts in, now I'm going to work on the right side. This is the side that's going to give me the most complications. As you can see, that belt sticks out a lot more than what the left side does, so you don't have a whole lot of working room here. So you need to kind of stretch that paddle system to get the bolt into the hole to get the nut behind it. I tried to use a C-clamp the first time, and it did okay, but it's a lot easier if you use some kind of locking pliers or something similar of that. It just worked a heck of a lot better. So the first time I used a C-clamp to try to hold that paddle system in place and push that bolt through so I could get the nut behind it, and there's just not a whole lot of room to work. And now moving on to the left side. As you can see, I decided to go with some locking pliers this time. It just worked out a lot better using those. And now we're going to work on the second paddle. So once again, the 2 front bolts come out, then you work on the 2 bolts on each side, the left and the right side. Now that I have all the bolts out, we're going to take the 2 inserts again out of the old paddle and we're going to put it into the new paddle. And as I'm working on the right side here, you can see that the scraper bar at the bottom there is pretty worn out, so we're going to be replacing that next. Anytime you replace the paddle system, you should probably replace your scraper bar at the same time. Just keeps it the worn level equal on all of it. And as you can see, I'm using the locking pliers again. It just made this process a lot easier. Now that we did the hardest part, which is the right side, we're going to move on over to the left side, get those bolts in, and we're going to work on the scraper bar after that. Now that we've replaced both the rubber paddles and we've tightened all the bolts, now we're going to work on the scraper bar. It's a good idea to replace the scraper bar at the same time you replace the paddles so they have normal wear. Here's a picture of a new scraper bar, and removing the old one is pretty simple. You just undo the 2 bolts on the side, you remove the spring, and install the new scraper bar. As you can tell, I have flipped over the snowblower onto the front of it so it's sitting vertically. You can see the 2 wheels, and that way you can get access to the scraper bar. So right now I'm just removing those springs. The old scraper bar comes off. I take the old springs, I'm putting them onto the new scraper bar for reinstallation. So that's about it, just putting the new scraper bar back on. If you need any of the parts, I'll put the link in the description for the paddles and for the scraper bar in there. If you look at the new paddles versus the old paddles, you can see there's a major difference. The old paddles have been worn out pretty well. Like I said, I'll leave a link in the description below for all the tools and for the paddle and for the scraper bar in there. Please like, subscribe, and comment below.